Good afternoon. Welcome everybody once again to Guide London and these weekly broadcasts that we are bringing you from London, telling you the stories of London and hopefully enticing you to come back and visit us once again as soon as you can. So my name's Fiona. Hello. I am one of about 600 or so blue badge tourist guides in London, members of Guide London, and we have been, like I say, sharing London with you for nearly a year now on these broadcasts. And we've covered a huge range of topics. And as ever, I'm going to say, if you've discovered us recently, then do head back through the archive and do a bit of browsing. You can find all sorts of other subjects. And today we're going to talk about something that is something that guides talk about quite a lot, but it's not immediately obvious as a subject that you might think of to have a guide. I know when I go traveling, I'm going to go to a place, I think, okay, I'm going to visit some of the historic sites, the big attractions, I'm going to eat some lovely food, and I'm going to go and maybe pop to the shops as well. And that might be to buy a kind of local speciality. It might be, just being in a shop in a different place gives you a feel of what daily life is like in that place. So I always think it's a really nice thing just to do. And as a guide, very often we'll be working maybe with a family, we'll go to the Tower of London, and then we'll sit down and have a cup of coffee at some point, and I might say, well, what are you doing the rest of the week? And they say, oh, tomorrow we're going shopping. Where should we go? And then we'll have a 20-minute conversation about, different possibilities for shops, where's good, what's good for this or that, or what sort of thing they want. And we do talk to clients quite a lot about shopping, but I don't think there's that many people who would think, I'm going shopping in London, I must have a guide. Or at least some people do, because, some of our guides specialise in it very much. But a lot of people might not think to do that. And actually, in London, the grand shops, the fine old establishments are destinations in their own right. Quite apart from the fabulous goods that they are selling, the stores have their own stories to tell, and often just as many stories as some of the sort of historic attractions. So today, to tell us a little bit about the stories of some of the 4 of the best known shops of London, to take us on a London shopping spree, we are joined by my friend and colleague, Karen Pierce-Goulding. Hello, Karen.
Hello, Fiona. Yes, we're going to tickle our taste buds and do a bit of retail therapy, hopefully.
Excellent. And we've got comments coming in already. So good afternoon, Ale from Italy. And also someone already saying, Donna saying, love Liberty's, Fortnum and Mason's and Hatchard's bookshop. So 2 of those we're going to hear much more about today. You're very on message, Donna. That's fabulous. So do put comments in the chat. If you've got comments or questions for Karen, pop them in the chat. Tell us where you're from as well. It's always lovely to know where people are around the world. And we can come back to those questions at the end. So without further ado, I will leave you to it, Karen.
Thank you, Fiona. Yes, a London shopping spree. And this virtual tour really was inspired when suddenly all the non-essential shops were shut and we began to hanker after that luxury experience. And I love these sort of happy shoppers with their little tote bags here, having gone to some of those most cherished and beloved department stores in London. And we're going to visit 4 of the biggies. Yes, we're going to go to Selfridges, Liberty's, maybe Harrods along the way, and Fortnum and Mason. So a little bit about me. My name's Karen Pierce-Goulding, and I've been guiding in London for nearly 20 years. I was an award-winning blue badge guide. Along the way, I've written a book called Royal London, The Haunts and Hideouts of Kings and Queens of England. It's a sort of light-hearted look at little pockets of London and the royal scandals that went on there. And I've done a bit of television presenting as well for Discovery TV. I did a series called London Next Stop, which was 13 episodes looking at different districts of London. But yes, so many people in the city are thinking, where would they go to first? Would they choose lovely Selfridges with its gleaming gleaming marble halls, or perhaps something a little bit more traditional, perhaps Liberty of London would appeal, or of course foodies among us would head straight for the Epicurean delights of gorgeous Fortnum and Mason. So there's something for everybody, really. But I think it's quite interesting that when we go back in London to the very roots and beginnings of this area, that in fact shopping has always been very much in the ether. And I wanted to show us a map of the oldest and most historic part of London, the Old City or Square Mile, Londinium as it was called by the Romans 2,000 years ago. And they immediately set up that area on the north bank of the River Thames to buy and sell goods, trading, importing some of the luxury things that they were missing from home, like red wine and olive oil. But soon markets developed in the Old City, buying and selling goods. And by medieval times, there was the rough and tumble markets with lots of fresh produce being sold. And we can see the ghost of that in the very street signs in the Old City, because the word cheap keeps popping up in Old Londinium. Cheap is an old word meaning marketplace, isn't it? Or cheaping, a place to buy and sell. And in fact, many people who perhaps know the British Isles well and perhaps have been up to the Cotswolds might know there's also villages called Chipping. Chipping Norton, Chipping Sudbury. There's even a Chipping Barnet up in North London. And Chipping derives from the word marketplace. And it may be where we get the very word shopping from, because from cheaping to chipping to chopping to shopping, there we go. And of course, it's quite interesting that the word cheap means a good bargain, doesn't it? But as time developed, the markets became covered, and that's basically because in London we do get the odd spot of rain, don't we? Here we have Leadenhall Market, and yet when they were digging the foundations of an office block nearby, they found foundations of the original Roman marketplace, the Forum. And here we have a photograph from the Museum of London showing a replica of the original marketplace that the Romans used all those centuries ago. So it's nice, those sort of layers of London. Other famous markets include, of course, Covent Garden Market, which was in the 1600s all fruit and veg, but now it's more sort of handmade goods and antiques and fripperies. And then if you like a bit of the old sort of good old rag trade, then down in the East End, Petticoat Lane Market is still going strong. But something quite sort of significant happened to shopping in the 18th and 19th century. It went a bit more upmarket, and that's because people had more disposable income. And so in the more affluent areas of London, like Piccadilly and Mayfair, we get these covered shopping arcades developing. Here we can see the Royal Opera Arcade, which is the oldest of them. But then there's also the Royal Arcade tucked on the edges of Mayfair, or perhaps the most celebrated Burlington Arcade, looking very twinkly and Christmassy with the Christmas baubles hanging from the ceiling. So this idea of sort of luxury bijou shops under one roof started off with these shopping arcades, inspired, of course, by Parisian shopping. But then as we get into the 19th century and the Victorian era, it becomes about bigger and better, and the idea of a department store. And as the name suggests, it means that departments all under one roof for the ultimate convenience of the shopper, of the customer. And here, perhaps the daddy of them all is Selfridges, isn't it? Grandiose, basically stretching a whole block. And when it opened in 1909, it was the largest shop in London. But let's have a look at where we are on our map here. So you can see Oxford Street there, and I put a red star at where Selfridges is. And Oxford Street, of course, is 1.5 miles of shopping, all the big chain stores along here, from Primark to John Lewis, as well as the more traditional Emporium. And Selfridges is sort of a little bit down from Marble Arch, isn't it? It very much was about catering to the customer, was always right. And it was a new birth in retail because it was an American style superstore. And the man who really brought Selfridges here was Harry Gordon Selfridge. Harry Gordon Selfridge was a Wisconsin-born businessman who'd run Marshall Fields in Chicago very successfully for many years. But he came on holiday to London and decided that what was missing was this sort of newfangled department store where everything was under one roof. So he employed the architect Daniel Burnham, a Chicago architect, to basically do this Edwardian Baroque style building with classical columns. It feels like a temple to retail therapy. And it had things like a roof garden. You could even play golf on the roof at one point, as well as having al fresco afternoon tea. There was a soda fountain, the very first one in London, a new American invention. And there was even a quiet room that if the shopper became a little bit frazzled, you could go and seek calm before continuing your shopping spree. Lovely. Let's go inside the modern day Selfridge here, which still retains its essence of these marble halls. And I think one thing you realise that still echoes down the century is that Selfridge understood marketing. He said the Brits are great at making things, beautiful luxury goods, but they're no good at selling them, marketing. You need to have pizzazz, American pizzazz, show off your items, window displays, light. Let the customer actually look and feel and touch the goods, which of course was very new for London. The Christmas shop, the bargain basement, and the idea of treating the customer very well. In fact, it's said that Mr. Selfridge invented the phrase, the customer is always right. And there was a glamour to Selfridges, a bit of American early Hollywood to the feel of it, which still retains that today, doesn't it? He understood as well that you needed a bargain basement, you needed the sales, and also even today, that little yellow tote bag that so many people proudly sport when they come out of Selfridges. Although it's only been used since the 1980s, it's very much part of the branding, isn't it, of Selfridge and Co. So what I'd like to do is take us forward now and see what happened on the 21st birthday of Selfridge. They decided to create a beautiful piece of art just above the foyer, and this is the Queen of Time by Gilbert, and it's a beautiful sort of Art Nouveau 11-foot statue with the clock above it, and it became a very famous meeting point. You'd meet under the Queen of Time. Let's have a closer look at this work. You can see above her hand, in her hand is some foliage that she's grasping, and in her other hand she holds the Angel of Peace, again with the olive branch. So it's a welcoming sight, and she's standing on the prow of a ship that is representing commerce, with mermaids leading the way, and you can see the lovely sort of blue and green enameling of these I always make me think of an Esther Williams sort of a Hollywood movie. The glamour continues inside with one of the most spectacular elevators that was in London. This is by the French ironworker, the Parisian ironworker, Edgar Brandt, and it's Art Deco. Today it's displayed in the Museum of London, and if we take a closer look, you can see these beautiful bronze reliefs of the zodiac. In the top left-hand corner is Gemini, then to the right you've got Aquarius, the water bearer, down in the left-hand corner Leo, and of course Taurus. So this is a very much an emblem, isn't it, of the Art Deco. Also, they had rather smart lift attendants, women in uniform, which added a certain American chic to the whole experience. It was an experience in its own to go to Selfridge's department store. And he never missed a trick, did Gordon Selfridge. He always had a marketing ploy. And when Louis Blériot flew his monoplane across the channel, Selfridge invited him to display the monoplane. It attracted 200,000 visitors and therefore 200,000 potential customers. Selfridge was quite a character. He became known as the Earl of Oxford Street, and he also had sort of entertainers to keep the shoppers amused. For example, the Dolly sisters were a favourite. This vaudeville double act, singers, would entertain the visitors, and even today there's a cafe in Selfridges called the Dolly Cafe. There was some scandal that perhaps Selfridge and the Dolly sisters were more than just friends, and he did have quite an expensive mistress habit and gambling habit. And if you might well be aware that he's been the recent subject of, yes, a television drama starring the actor Jeremy Piven, Mr. Selfridge. There we go. So quite a colourful life. But I need to head us down to our next department store. But here's a little bit of fun. When you leave Selfridges next time, turn left down Oxford Street, but look out for a little alleyway. It's easy to miss, a bit of secret London. You have to look for the clock on the pavement and then turn sharp left, and you will be squeezed down this narrow alleyway leading to a bit of backstage London. We're going to St Christopher's Place. Now, at one point, this was Barrett's Yard in the 1700s, which was a slum, but as you can see, it's been nicely gentrified since then, and it's full of little boutiques and a lot of restaurants that are doing al fresco dining, which of course this summer was rather useful with meeting your friends outside but remaining socially distant. So a nice reminder of that time. But where are we on the map? Well, we've gone to Selfridges, but I want to take us down towards Oxford Circus to something a little bit more traditional. Yes, we're going to Liberty of London. And when we look at this is the quintessentially British feel, isn't it? With the sort of half-timbered facade and the terracotta chimney pots looking a little bit like something out of Hampton Court Palace. But in fact, this bit of Liberty is a bit younger than the original. It was added in the 1920s. If we look to the side where Regent Street is, this white Portland stone side was the original shop. And if you look along the top, you can see it's got lots of statues. You might be able to make out Britannia in the centre with her trident. And these figures represent trade with the Far East, with Asia, with India, with the Orient. And that's because originally Liberty of London was owned by Arthur Lazenby Liberty, a Buckinghamshire draper who had fallen in love with all these beautiful fabrics and silks and satins and exotic produce from the Far East. And his dream was to have a sort of a bazaar of these goods from distant lands. So that was the idea behind Liberty of London. He had to borrow £200,000 from his future father-in-law, and when he set up a drapery shop nearby, it was so successful that within 3 years he'd been able to pay back his then father-in-law and extend into this emporium of beautiful fabrics. And it became very much about fashion. Liberty once said he didn't want to follow fashion, he wanted to create it. And it actually attracted a lot of the creative set, you know, sort of painters and artists. And in fact, yes, the father of the arts and crafts movement, William Morris, was a regular customer. And he and Liberty were birds of a feather. And they collaborated. And what Morris produced these beautiful sort of flora and fauna prints. And here we have one of the most famous called The Strawberry Thief. The whole arts and crafts movement was about going back to a simpler time before the Industrial Revolution, to the medieval age when everything was a little bit more simpler, a little bit more sort of reassuring. And really, that facade that was added later to Liberty of London sums up the arts and crafts movement rather well. And when you go inside, that timber frame it becomes, if you like, a miniature globe theatre. It's made out of solid English oak, actually made out of two dismantled Royal Navy battleships, HMS Hindustan and HMS Impregnable, were broken up, and then the wood was used to create this wonderful sort of galleried interior. Liberty's diversifies and sells all sorts of wonderful clothing and haberdashery and food. But of course, its signature is the Liberty scarf, isn't it? And by the 1930s, any fashionista worth their weight would have sported a Liberty silk scarf. It was very much part, and they do still this wonderful retrospective, but also modern twist with the different sort of Morris designs. And they do some rather fabulous handbags as well. Just around the corner, actually, if you were to sort of dip into Liberty's and then want something a little bit more sort of high-end fashion, then yes, just behind is Carnaby Street with this shocking pink pop-up boutique. Very much the centre of swinging 60s London, but also all about the fashionable today. So that echoing of Liberty's and wanting to be a leader in fashion rather than a follower makes Carnaby Street really the perfect sort of backwater for the shop. But I want to take us to another British institution now. We're going to head down Regent Street, past Piccadilly Circus, and onto the street known as Piccadilly to probably the most famous grocery store in London. Yeah, Fortnum and Mason. And if you look, you can see a royal coat of arms above the front door. Now, many a shop in London would be proud to have a royal warrant with the golden lion of England on the left and a white unicorn of Scotland supporting the royal coat of arms. It means that the royal family think that whatever you're selling is good enough for them. So it's patronised by royalty. And Fortnum and Mason's beginnings go way back to the 18th century, when a rather enterprising footman to Queen Anne's court, William Fortnum, realised that there was a lot of wastage going on at the end of a state banquet, because the candelabra with the candles, well, they were being taken away and the candles, only half burnt down, were being thrown away. So William Fortnum thought this was an opportunity, and he began to pocket the candles. And then when he was speaking to his landlord, Hugh Mason, they decided to sell these candles at market, made money, enough money to open Mr. Fortnum and Mr. Mason's grocery shop. And it became all about pickling, preserving and packaging wonderful food. And I think, yes, most people would consider this to be something top of their list when visiting London, a visit to partake of some of the goodies, the delights, the delicacies within Fortnum and Mason. So let's head on in to take a look. And yes, you go up the red carpeted stairs here. And we've got two footmen with their candelabra, remembering the story of Mr. Fortnum and Mr. Mason. And they've even got red liveried attendants as you go in. And we're going to go into the confectionery department. In fact, we're going to the sort of candied fruit area with every fruit you can think of that's been sugared. But also they've got 12 different flavours of marshmallow and similar of Turkish delight and chocolate covered cherries. Think of any sweetie and it will be there. And it doesn't matter whether you buy one chocolate covered cherry or 20, you are treated like royalty in Fortnum and Mason's with the chandeliered interiors. They're also known, of course, for their blended tea, and they have a tea bar as you go in with, instead of baristas, tea risters that will blend 80 different types of leaves for you to create your bespoke tea. But I think a lot of people, when they think of Fortnum and Mason, yeah, they think of the hampers, don't they? The Fortnum and Mason wicker hampers. And they're not just for Christmas, are they? Perhaps you're going on to some posh picnic. Perhaps you've got tickets for Royal Ascot races, or perhaps Henley Regatta, and you want your traditional wicker hamper with perhaps a nice bottle of something cold and fizzy, perhaps some smoked salmon, some caviar. You can make up your Fortnum and Mason hamper to your tastes. And Christmas is delightful there, isn't it? I mean, my goodness, this was Fortnum and Mason's last year, and it's lit up like an enormous advent calendar, and they light a window each day, and the window displays are absolutely delicious. They also do a pretty good afternoon tea, don't they, on the 4th floor with the carriage cake stands and the cucumber sandwiches with the crusts cut off, which is all important, isn't it? But for our finale of our department stores, if you like, I want to now take us back to Piccadilly Circus, and we're going to go on the Underground. Yes, we're going to take that dark blue Piccadilly line, just a couple of stops, and we're going to end up at Knightsbridge. And when you emerge from Knightsbridge Underground Station, what do you see? Yes, wonderful Harrods department store, this terracotta palace. It's worth in the region of £1.5 billion today, and it's perhaps the most sort of famous of them all, isn't it? It has 400 different departments. It boasts it can get you anything in the world. Everything for everyone, everywhere is its motto. And it has 10 restaurants within the department store, because shopping, as we know, is hungry work. At night, they light up Harrods department store with 12,000 fairy lights. It looks like a fairy tale palace, doesn't it, of retail? And there is a bit of a fairy tale story behind the origins of Harrods, because it's a bit of a Cinderella story. When you look at this grand building, you can't believe that it started off as a tiny little grocer shop in Stepney in London's East End. And here we can see Charles Harrod measuring out his grocery shop goods here. But he happened to go to the Great Exhibition of 1851, which was that wonderful World Fair that took place in Hyde Park. And when he was walking away, he looked and realised that the Brompton Road was getting a lot of passing trade, that visitors coming and going from the Great Exhibition were using this as their way of getting to and from the exhibition and going home. And he thought it would be the perfect place to set up a second branch of Harrods grocery shop. So he decided to give that responsibility to his son, Charles Digby Harrod. And Charles Digby Harrod was a very talented entrepreneurial businessman. And he soon realised that if he diversified a bit, he'd attract a more sort of upmarket clientele. So as well as selling the fruit and veg that Harrods was famous for, he also began to sell things like perfume, stationery, and even medicine. And he soon gained a faithful clientele of regulars. However, disaster struck. Yes, on the 7th of December, 1883, the second branch of Harrods on the Brompton Road burnt to the ground, and all that was left was the shell of the building. But Charles Digby Harrod was a glass half full kind of a guy, and he was determined to honour all his regular customers' sort of lists for Christmas. They'd already got their orders in, and through hard work and perseverance, he managed not only to honour those Christmas orders, but even he made a profit on them. So much profit that, yes, he was able to rebuild Harrods department store bigger and better than it was before. And it's the glory that we know and love today. Today it's owned by the Qatar family, isn't it? And it's just lovely to browse inside. It's a Victorian emporium, isn't it? I mean, the food hall in the basement is often a beeline for people with these art deco tiles and different places where you can eat your way around the world. I mean, there's champagne and oysters, isn't there? Or sushi, or perhaps you like those lovely little macaroons. There's something to tempt everybody here, as well as all those different departments to Harrods department store. It also nods at its old-fashioned roots. It's been there since 1898, and yes, you can still see the original sort of horse and carriages can take you around Harrods should you wish, with their traditional livery, which is this sort of olive green with gold lettering. And again, yes, you've got to get the bag, haven't you? The Harrods bag, a bit like the yellow tote bag to Selfridges. It's worth saying as well that Harrods did embrace new technology, and in fact, it was the very first department store in London to have a moving escalator, a moving staircase, an escalator. Oh, it caused quite a stir, the talk of the town. And in fact, people were queuing around the block in order to get their first go on Harrods moving staircases. The newspapers of the day are priceless, because many of the women of the early Edwardian era were still wearing quite tight corsets, and some of them were quite fragile creatures. And after their first experience of moving staircases, they were feeling rather faint and woozy. So Harrods, being very classy, employed butlers with trays of brandy. And if you were feeling a little bit faint, you just took a little tot of brandy and off you went, shopping away, perhaps spending a little bit more money than you meant to. So a pretty good marketing ploy from Harrods department store. Well, my goodness, we've come to the end of our lightning shopping spree. If you want to join me, we go into a little bit more depth on the virtual tour, but hopefully it's given you a flavour of some of those lovely department stores that we're all missing at the moment, and perhaps you can put a list of what you'd like first. Apparently 80% of people who come to London on holiday, it's on their top 10 list. 80% will want to go to the famous department stores in the capital.
Thank you, Karen. That was so fabulous, and so enticing at the moment, I have to say. But yeah, really, really lovely. And like you said, that was a sort of a highlights of your highlight virtual tour in a way.
Yeah.
So when you do if you do a full length version, then you do cover more ground and more stories, don't you? And one of the comments that came in here, we have a comment from Menai saying Hamley's brilliant for children and will never forget the first time. And I think in your full version you get Hamley's in.
We do. We couldn't miss out. You know, toys from 0 to 99. So everybody loves a bit of Hamley's, don't they? But yes. Yes, and I think, yes, most people remember their first visit, don't they?
Yes, Yes, I do. I remember the railway, little model railway track going round and round the stairs and things.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And lots of people saying thank you very much. Really interesting, lovely stuff. So, of course, if you do want to get in touch with Karen, then there's various ways you can do it. One of them is to have a look at the Guide London website. So here we are. And the easiest way to find Karen would be just to type Karen Pierce-Goulding into the search box there. But the other thing you could try is if you try typing in shopping and see what that comes up with, and come up with some tours, suggested possible tours, and there we have ideas you could do on a London fashion and shopping tour as well. So that if you click on that, you get various different places you might like to visit, some ideas to think of when you kind of talk to a guide and say, you know, places you want to go. And down the bottom of these tour sections, we've got this form, which is called the Guide Match form. And so if you fill in one of those with various details, then it will be submitted to 3 different guides and you'll get a few people coming back to you. And at the moment, you'll see in amongst the options of walking, public transport, cycling, driving tour, and also virtual tour. So that's the button to click on for the moment. If you click that and then fill in your details and send it off to us, you should get responses from a couple of up to 3 guides. We'll come back with some options for a virtual tour. So I think I need to say thank you very much to Karen. I'm going to stop sharing that.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you everyone for joining us again. And I'm just looking at where I don't think we had any questions. Lots of lovely comments in and people from Croatia and Switzerland and Kiev, very cold Kiev. Yep, cold in Chester as well. Spain. And lots of people saying thank you very much, very interesting, great. You might be tempting some people into going shopping. People who don't like shopping could be persuaded, Penny, to change her mind on the back of that presentation.
Good. I'm glad.
Thank you. And do join us again next week, same time, same place, to have another broadcast from Guide London. And also remember, you can go back through our archive and fill in any that you missed and fill in the gaps. By the time you get to come and visit us in London, you will know all about it. You'll know exactly where you want to go and exactly who you want to have as guide to show you around as well. So thank you very much. And we will say goodbye.